Why don't I read recently published books? Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Mortals Book Reviews special episode here today. I'm live as usual on the 7th of May 2025, and as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I review the hottest trending books of 2025. Let's go! Okay, no, none of that coming on today. Definitely none of that. And instead, in this special episode, I'm inspired to do what the title says here, which is going over how I choose books, techniques to find and pre-filter enjoyable reads. So this was actually inspired by a comment from a regular viewer, Carlos_AM. So thank you, Carlos. And yeah, essentially I want to go over my method for the stage of before finding a book, how I go about, I guess, like getting a list or something like this, ways I actively try to avoid wasting my time on things which won't be useful, aren't useful if I have started them, and some little tricks and tips that I have to get the most out of your reading. So let's jump into the first section here, finding new books. You're on the mountain, there's thousands of books in your library spread out of you, hundreds of thousands if you're in your Amazon wish list or something like this. How the hell do you go about finding a new book? Well, before we do this, I think the most best way of doing this for myself is a rather informal recommendation system. And the most important thing for me is actually just having a list. A list that on my phone that I write down, but you could probably have this in paper or somewhere else, a wish list on Amazon or something like this. And the reason I do this is because every time I hear about a book that kind of piques my interest, I just quickly write it down. The amount of times that I've thought, oh yeah, that sounds like something interesting, I'll remember that, I'll look that up later, and then it's just gone is too much to count, hence why I have a list on my phone. And now, this is not a commitment to reading, it is purely just as a first step in this kind of informal searching process for finding a new book to read or something that I would like to read. Currently, I have about 200 to 250 just written on my phone. Pretty simple enough, just the name of the book and the author, and you probably don't even need that, just the name of the book would usually be enough, that I kind of add and subtract from over time. It's not, like I said, it's very informal, so the stuff at the top of the list is the more recent things that I've heard. And I will sometimes go further down the list, trying to find perhaps ones that are just interesting or that I've been looking at for a while. The further down the list it goes, like the more likely it is that I won't ever get around to reading it, just because I've perused this list so many times and it's just never jumped out at me. A good thing to look out for is if you accidentally write the same book down there twice. This happened for The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch for me. So that's one that I'll try and get to it at some point in the nearer future. And all of this, I guess, is just a way of getting a base set to work from. Now, how do you actually find them, though? That's, sure, it's nice to have the list, but what can you actually do to get them onto the list? Well, the first one for me is recommendations from people. And this is from people who know me, who know that I like to read. So this is, reviewers in the comments or commenters of people in real life who will recommend a book directly to me. And, many of the times I've read stuff from the comments which has just been an absolute blast. East of Eden comes to mind. I believe Johnny was the one who recommended that at some point. And it's not a surefire way. Another recent book that I reviewed was The Tao of Pooh and the Tale of Piglet. That was a bit rubbish. There were some enjoyable aspects to it, but overall I was like, that would my life is my life significantly better for reading it? Not particularly. It was interesting though, and that this will touch upon why maybe just not enjoyable is the best way of not sorting for exactly what you're looking for, because you can be looking for other things which are highly valuable to yourself but aren't necessarily a enjoyable read. So I tend to value this system more highly than others. If someone recommends me a book, it's more likely to get read in the near future and to stay higher up on my kind of informal recommendation list, just because it is suited to me. Someone has gone out of their way to recommend something. So that is one of the first ways. The next would just be hearing about a good book in general. Once again, there's many different ways you can go about doing this. Sometimes I've just gone to the, top 100 books of all time sort of list. And typically these will have been filtered by age. And so you will find if it's over all time, you're going to get recommendations from things that were, just absolute gems from like 200 years ago, for example, or were super highly influential, maybe not an enjoyable read, but even something like The Prince by Machiavelli is really, really interesting for the historical context of the book, the things it promotes in the book, a completely different worldview that you're very unlikely to encounter in regular everyday people. These are the type of things which I really look for and jump out at me. If it's all in a more kind of modern context, I quite enjoy, resourcing books from people who I consume like media content from. Mostly for me, this is from podcasts. And so I typically will take a recommendation if it's from someone highly knowledgeable in a particular field and they recommend the book. A recent example of this would be Lynn Alden, and she's very good with financial stuff. And when she recommends a financial book, that's something that I'm like more likely to pay attention to. And yet I won't read her very own book that she's written. Why is this? We'll talk about that very shortly. One thing to be wary of, I've noticed, is when people talk about books, it's got to be them bringing it up rather than being asked a direct question like, what's your favorite book of all time? Because I've noticed this trend, which is that when you're asked what's your favorite book of all time, most people are not book reviewers like myself or are that interested in the, they don't think about it as deeply perhaps as I do. Not trying to be non-humble here. It's more that when someone is asked that question, typically they'll just try and think of any book that comes to mind, and usually it's the one they've read recently. And so if you ask someone like, what's your favorite book of all time, I would say about more than 50% of the time they will just list a book that they've read within the last couple of months, which they enjoyed, which kind of defeats the purpose of, your favorite book of all time. Because that question also implies like that someone is a pretty voracious reader, that they read a lot, that they think about the books, and have like a rating system for themselves of what they enjoyed or didn't enjoy, what they got the most out of. If someone asks me what's my favorite book of all time, I do have an answer. But I would want to ask in return, like, the most enjoyable read of book of all time, the one that was most impactful to me, that changed my life the most. All of these sorts of things can be the best book of all time, but with a different context and things like this. I have in my head, I can list off my favorite non-fiction versus fiction books of all time. And so this is something I've noticed a lot. And so if someone brings it up just while talking about a topic, that is much more highly valuable than being asked the direct question. Because if you want to see this in action, in the Mere Mortals Conversations, I have no idea what number, I think the guy's name was Frankie Lee. I asked him this, and he did this exactly. He just listed a book that he'd read in the last, week or two, which is why I stopped asking that question when I was doing the interviews or the conversations on the Mere Mortals Conversations podcast. You might be thinking, other book channels, that would be a great place for recommendations, because those are the people who rate them, who read a lot, and that would be something that I would enjoy and that I could find immensely valuable. And you would be wrong. I find them generally useless, to be honest, and have really only learnt YouTube techniques in terms of thumbnails, in terms of how to start a video, of what you should be doing, and applied almost zero of them, to be honest, because I don't really want to play the YouTube game. And the main problem I find from other book review channels is that they either have a very niche genre, like fantasy or true crime or something like this, which, they're going to be just reviewing all of these types of books, and I have a bit more of a widespread taste. Or they are producing a lot of content, and so they're reading, 200 plus books a year. What a lot of book review channels you'll find. My favorite book from August 2024 or something, and they've read 8 or something like that. It's just like, Jesus Christ, these people are just powering through these books. So obviously they enjoy doing it. Perhaps some of that is for the content. I know there is like Bookstagram, for example. You'll find people who set a target of reading 365 books a year, aka a book a day, which is absolutely bonkers. And if you're focused on a goal-based thing, the recommendations you're going to get from them, I find I haven't connected with anything they've said. The way they've talked about things, there's nothing that's really jumped out at me as being going, oh wow, yeah, this person who reads a lot of books, they have a really, really good view on this particular thing or that particular thing. The reason I'm doing this special episode, for example, is because I had a bit of a gap. I'm reading a rather large book at the moment, Charles Mackay's, I think it's Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And I was just like, I'm not going to be able to finish this in time for this episode this week. So I'll do this special episode. And in the months coming, I'm not going to be releasing much, and one will be because I kind of need to stock up. I'm going to be traveling. I'll have less time for this. I probably read around 40-ish books a year, so obviously that's not enough for content every single week. And I think this is I wouldn't want to do a review on a channel, for example, of a book that I haven't fully read through. And maybe I have done that once or twice where I've read most of it and it's just tailed out or something. But by and large, I just haven't found other book review channels to be that great. And if you want some examples, Better Than Food, I think his name's Jack Reeds or something like this. I read there was a couple of like Spanish type ones I was getting into. Honestly, a lot of them have a very similar variation where it is a particular niche channel just doing book reviews. A slight exception to this rule are kind of people who I admire for other things, and then I find out that they've got a bit of a reading habit and have like a book list of some sort. People like Roosh V, Chris Williamson, Jace from Gypsy Tales, Eduardo Lima, they typically are not a book review channel, but they just have a little side section where they do this. And so, usually these will be blogs or videos, and I'll selectively choose bits and pieces from them because it's, book reviewing's not their main thing, funnily enough. And funnily enough, I won't even really watch their videos more than like a minute or two just to get a general vibe of what it's about. Because I don't want to taint my own interpretation or ruin or affect it when I do these. So unless I know, I won't read the book unless it's something where I'm like, yeah, I'll see what they have to say about it, but it just doesn't interest me. One, for example, has done a review of Treasure Island by, I think it's Robert Stevenson, someone like that. And I've yet to watch that review. And the reason for that is because I also want to read that book at some point, and I don't want his interpretation affecting mine. So those are a couple of ways that I personally have find books and will use this informal recommendation system to go through. And then we come to the next stage, which is the pre-filtering of these. So I've got a general kind of list, but I don't really know much about the book. I don't know what it's particularly about, how long it is, who the author is, how it's written, all of these sorts of things. So what are some ways that I can try and filter and get rid of the useless stuff, which occurs both before and during this process of having the list. So Carlos AM as I mentioned, inspired this, so I want to talk about his comment. He was saying, interesting. I usually research a lot before I spend my time with a book, and even then, I had to quit a couple of times. I would like to hear why you don't pick new books. I have been recently disappointed with one. And then I said I'd get back to him in the next special episode, and I think I forgot, or there were some others coming up, so first of all, apologies, Carlos. I'm getting to it now. My bad. And the companion to this episode right now would actually be the one titled Don't Read Everything, where I went over times where I've had a book in my possession which I thought had a bit of potential, and then the reasons for why I didn't actually end up reading it, with a lot of specific examples. And this was due to, the style of it, the length of the book, the structure, how it was written, the topic it was on, things like this. So, getting into, I guess, pre-filtering, why do I have this general rule of no new books? It's for several reasons. As I mentioned, time, I think, is a great filter. It will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you that you won't be able to do when it's a book that's recently published. And when I say recently published, I mean in like the last 10 years. If it to this day is relevant and it was written 100 years ago or is of some interest, I think that shows that it has some value. Old books can have their own difficulties, especially with language. So things like Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, or The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, for example, or obscure references. But there must be some reason why they have retained attention over such a long time period. You can even get lucky if it is a classic or it has a classic label, by simply just seeing that. One time I was in the library and I was just perusing and I saw something had a classic labeled. It's like, oh yeah, I pulled it out. It wasn't too big as well. So I was like, this is interesting. And that turned out to be Lost Horizon by James Hilton, which is probably still in my top 10. And that was, just purely because time had done the filtering for me. If I had used a similar method and just picked out any book from the library, the chances of it being in my top 10 would be significantly less. On the flip side of this, modern books tend to follow short-term trends, I've noticed a lot. So authors will write to what is hot at the current moment, and incentives mean that they kind of need to pump out 1 to 2 books a year to, I guess, make money and things like this, which I think is the opposite of someone really honing their craft and being very careful and particular with their words. The economy or the economics is probably a better word, of book selling is so hard, from what I gather. I've never tried to sell a book, that you need to spend probably more of your time on the marketing of it rather than on the actual writing of it. And so a couple of other things with the newness, science books become out of date rather quickly. And so, something like some of Malcolm Gladwell's work hasn't aged well because he's written about a study that, Freakonomics did or something like this. And then it turns out, it was just a biased study and wasn't so great. We already live in the time period that we're in, so there's no kind of nostalgia. So if someone's writing about, a classic of 2025, that people in 50 years will be like, damn, that's so reflective of the 2020, the social media period or something like that. We're already living in it, so it's not that amazing, exciting, or something like this. On the converse side, if someone is writing a book nowadays about the Wild West or about 1800s England, well, they're kind of making stuff up. They never actually lived through it, so you don't get that benefit of the historical, I guess, accuracy or the feel of that time period, because they're kind of trying to reconstruct it. So look, are all new books trash or anything like this? No, it's just purely for myself. The percentage of new books that I've read have been very disappointing in terms to the percentage of good ones that I find in a much longer time period. So, things that are more than 20 years old, for example. So this is why I particularly do it. The other problem is the amount of books in creation today is vastly, vastly dwarfing anything that anyone could ever read, obviously, but also in comparison. There was probably more books published in the last 20 after the 2000 than there has been across all of history, especially if you're including ebooks in this as well. So there's so much more stuff to sort through that if you're looking for something and it's something new, it's just a really, really hard, I personally find. So typically, 10 plus years, 15 plus years is my general rule. I'll bend this rule for certain topics if it's a history book. So if it's written about history and it was only published in the last 10 years, I'll read that. Or if there is a really particular niche topic I want to explore, and that is kind of currently relevant or something that I think will be interesting, something along the lines of maybe nuclear would be interesting. So typically it would be the history of nuclear power or nuclear bombs or something like that. And then maybe the book would have a little extra section right at the end about what's to come, something like that. Usually, I guess you'll notice that in the finding section, I didn't really talk about genre or topics. And I think that's because I can really enjoy any and all. It doesn't really matter what it's about. But I don't usually fall into the series or worlds type of thing. So it's very unlikely that I'll ever read an 8-part series. When I was a child, I used to, for sure. And I'd read the Del Toro Quest or the Artemis Vows, or I've forgotten the spy name. Maybe once in the comments you might be able to remember as well. And Alex McNabb, I used to love his spy stuff. But nowadays, it's been rare that I've really found something and I'm going like, I want to read 8 books in this series. And that's just because I don't know, my tastes just tend to vary. I don't like getting stuck into one thing. You'll notice I might have a trend. So, for example, recently, a recent spate of open source and financial type books has been taking my fancy. But yeah, there's nothing that I generally won't read. I'll read stuff which is not typically intended for males, or a typical male thing, rom-com, for example, or romance books. I'll read Thomas Hardy. Sure, that's I find that interesting. It's more certain styles I tend to avoid. Critiques of politics or religion or sexual morals, or critiques of a current time period, even if it's like from a time period in the past, less interesting. True crime, revelry of serial killers, definitely something that doesn't particularly, the gruesomeness is just a bit too morbid for me. Experimental styles, typically I've found to be trash, with the occasional gem. So, for every Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Cien Años de Soledad, there is 10 James Joyce's or Julio Cortázar's, which are just absolute nonsense to me. So that's kind of my little section there on the pre-filtering them. What are some things you can do to get the most out of them? Well, here's some just tips to get the most out of your reading. Number one is drop early. Drop a book if you're not enjoying it. If you're like 20% of the way through and you're finding it a slog, if you're doing the old blinking, almost falling asleep while reading, that's not a good sign. And just don't torture yourself. There are more books that you are interested in. 250 books I said I've got on my list. 40 books a year. That's what, 6 years of just reading right there. And I'm continually adding to this list. I'm not going to be able to read everything that is mildly interesting to me. So there is value in dropping something that you're not enjoying to go onto something that you do enjoy. And a good backup, I would say, is to have multiple books with you. So, for example, Lee Kuan Yew is the history of kind of Singapore and how one man changed that country. I do find that interesting. I've been meaning to look into him for a while. There's a couple of books on him. I'll probably grab 2 or 3 of them, and one will be an autobiography, one will be someone writing about him, and I'll maybe just test them out and see which one of them I prefer, and then read that. If you're doing something where you're like, I'm not sure if I'll enjoy this, have like a backup author who you almost always love. For me, that's John Steinbeck or Mark Twain. And so if I'm reading something and I've got that beside me, well, then I've got a Mark Twain book which I can jump over to if I am noticing like, this one's starting to drag and I'm not really enjoying it. All of this sounds very expensive, buying multiple books and things like this, which is indeed correct, and why I almost extensively use a library. I used to read through everything that I started. I've stopped largely doing that. One, I believe maybe still does this, but probably is getting a bit better at it. I beg you not to do this. It's foolishness. For whatever, I get the OCD nature of trying to complete everything that you've started, but there is no shame. It's not that there's no shame. There's no benefit to going through, and other than being able to claim that you read something. Sure, for very long ones, you might have to do a bit of slogging. The Leo Tolstoys out there, the War and Pieces, you're going to have to slog through a bit. But there is something to be said about not torturing yourself continually just for the aspect of saying that you've read a book. If your goal is to read 365 books a year, it's not a great goal to have, personally. I would say not a great use of your time. Now, this might sound hypocritical because I regularly review books which I will rate in the 0 to 5 range, and that rating system, it's hard because it's kind of like trying to encompass everything. So if you don't know, my rating system in general is from 0 to 10. I don't really give zeros. I don't give 10. So technically, I guess 0.5 to 9.5. And I will find that there's things which are worth reading, which are not great books, or things that you don't enjoy or that you disagree with. But they might have a historical perspective to it. You could find value from it. It could be a textbook that's useful for your job. There's plenty of different reasons why it's worth reading something which you don't actually enjoy that much. It's the needless torturing in the other section, which I was particularly talking about. So, for example, I read Mein Kampf quite a few whiles, probably a decade ago, if I had to guess. And I found it very instructive on how to kill Jews. No. It's actually not instructive for that. I don't think this was when Hitler was in jail and certainly not had any power to do any of the awful stuff that ended up happening on his orders. No, it was very instructive because you got to see into the mind of a person before he got power, and you can go, oh, okay, so if someone's displaying these types of traits or saying these types of things, these are the type of, and then they get into power, that's very worrisome, and you should be worried about someone displaying certain type of things like this. Overall, that book, what stood out to me, I just remember how poorly written it was. Just the sentence structure, the way that he tried to communicate, I found awful. I was reading the English translation, not the German original, so maybe that had a bit of an impact to it. But there's plenty of things like that where, I'd estimate I still make the mistake of maybe 5% of the time, 10% of the time of reading something which I probably should have dropped. Partly for my OCD, partly for the channel. It's not great. I shouldn't do it. I still do it a little bit, but getting that down to a manageable level is, I think, a very useful goal to aim for. Taking notes whilst reading, I think, is quite instructive as well. Bookmarking pages is Juan's preferred style. I don't really do that. Please don't deface a book if you've got it from the library. The amount with underlining and scribbles on it is depressing, unless it's your own, of course. I have a notes app. I use Google Keep. and just jot down thoughts and collate them together for these reviews, for example. I used to keep a summary on a Word document for many, many years of the stuff that I was reading, probably from like 2013 to 2024. I used to do this, and some of that was rather extensive, and it was essentially a book review. I could probably just go to some of those notes and just read them straight out. Have to change up the intro and the ending, of course, but the meat of it would still be very have a thematic introspection of essentially a review, and that was very helpful for me, and I greatly enjoyed doing it. Hence why I also do this book review channel, because I was already kind of doing it in a physical form of, well, not physical, typing form of writing it out in a Word document. I stopped doing that recently just because, I realized these videos and audios are essentially doing that, and it was kind of pointless. I'm an outlier. I get a lot of enjoyment from doing these, from dissecting it, from analyzing it, discussing it, getting my thoughts on it particularly out there. So keep that caveat in mind. For you at home, just perhaps the casual reader, not as interesting, and maybe not something that you really want to do. But if you want to remember things from these books as well, it's highly instructful for doing that. A couple of other just mini stuff here before we end off. Find your limit per day of reading. Typically for me, it's 1 hour in the evening at any given stretch. If I break it up and I read a little bit during the day as well, I could get that out to like 2 to 3 hours, but that's probably about as much as I'd ever want to spend a day reading. I've already talked about having multiple books by your side, not just for switching if one of them to get rid of, but also just variety. Sometimes if you're reading a heavy book, it's nice to jump over to a lighter one, or I would used to read a little bit heavier books during the day, and then in the evening I would indulge in more of the the fiction, and take transportation into another world. Accessibility of being able to read everywhere. A Kindle is great for this. I don't know where mine is. It's around here somewhere, which I'll be using whilst traveling. But even, just taking a book with you when you're going to a doctor's appointment and you're just sitting there doing nothing, having one in your car, having one on the lounge. If you just place them in locations where you sit and do nothing and you want to read more, that's a great way of doing it, because you'll be able to just rack up an extra 10 minutes, and then maybe you're really enjoying it, and next thing you know, you've read for an hour. So that's if you want to read more and kind of find yourself not doing that. Finding people to chat about that with, not really for me doing a book club. I've tried it once or twice, but you have to read what everyone else wants to read. So I'm pretty particular with my whole list here. So if it breaks a lot of these, like, I don't want to read a crappy book just to be able to talk about it at a book club. But it is fun if you meet someone who is a fellow book enjoyer, and you can compare notes or talk about stuff that you enjoyed or you didn't enjoy, things like this. I enjoy hearing about that from other people. And then probably most importantly is just to have fun, whatever that takes for you to do. So it could be picture books, ebooks, audiobooks, although that's not reading a book. I'll die on that hill. Comics, poetry, whatever floats your boat. I think if you've gotten this far into a how to choose books sort of place, you probably enjoy reading and already know your style and the stuff that you enjoy. And probably the most important thing is just to not let anybody else dictate that your style is the wrong style to read, or that, if you enjoy poetry and only poetry, and you feel you should be reading other stuff, you feel you should be tackling history books or things like this. No, there's absolutely no reason for that. You do you. Read the things and get the most enjoyment out of your reading. I think that's the most important thing. So we're going to end it here for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in on this special episode. And this is a Value for Value podcast. I provide all this value up front and just ask that you return it in some shape or form. Probably my main call out for today would just be give me some book recommendations. What are some of the things you think I would enjoy? List them down in the comments below or reach out via social media. That would be, the most important thing that you could do to provide some value back to this channel, other than doing the other stuff, liking, subscribing, share it out, word of mouth, sharing it with a friend, etc., etc. I am doing these live. I've got one more live one. Wednesday, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And then I'm going to be traveling for about 2 months. So maybe I'll be able to do one or two just random reviews whilst I'm on the road, but it's going to be very difficult with all the podcasting stuff and things like this. I know Juan will be trying to fill in some of these gaps, at least for the next couple of weeks after I'm traveling. So one more review coming up on the book I just mentioned, the Popular Delusions and Madness of Crowds. And then we'll hopefully really be recommencing a regular schedule, probably sometime in August, is what I would say. So I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world, and ciao for now. Karen out. Bye.